September 15, 1943. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. Major General Oliver P. Eccles stood frozen before the intelligence photographs spread across the mahogany table. Around him, the highest-ranking officers of the Army Air Force's Material Command maintained an uneasy silence, broken only by the soft ticking of a wall clock. The black and white images, smuggled out of Germany at tremendous risk, showed what American intelligence had feared for months: a fully operational jet-powered fighter aircraft, the Messerschmitt Me-262. "How fast again?" Eccles finally asked, his voice tight. Colonel Cass, who, recently returned from Europe, cleared his throat. "Intelligence estimates 540 miles per hour, sir. Possibly more. That's nearly 100 miles per hour faster than our best fighter, the P-51 Mustang." Eccles picked up one of the photographs, studying the sleek, sinister silhouette with its distinctive swept-back wings and underslung engines. "And you're certain they're in production?" "Yes, sir. Low-rate initial production. But the reports indicate full-scale manufacturing beginning by year's end. Conservative estimates suggest they could have 100 operational by spring." The implications were clear to everyone in the room. After years of Allied air superiority, the technological advantage had suddenly shifted. American bombers, already suffering heavy losses over Europe, would be defenseless against an opponent they couldn't outrun, outclimb, or outmaneuver. Conventional fighters would be helpless against an adversary that could attack, disengage, and vanish before they could respond. General Eccles slowly returned to his seat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, where exactly are we with our own jet program?" The uncomfortable silence returned deeper this time. America's jet development had languished in research laboratories and committee meetings for years, while conventional aircraft production took priority. The Bell XP-59 Aerocomet project was underway, but progressing slowly. Its performance projections fell far short of the German fighter. "We have nothing comparable, sir," admitted General Franklin Carroll, head of fighter development. "Not even close. Bell's XP-59 is years from operational capability and doesn't match these performance figures." Eccles' expression hardened. "That's not acceptable. Not with what we're seeing here." He turned to his aide. "Get me direct lines to all our major aircraft manufacturers: Lockheed, North American, Republic, Curtiss. I want proposals for a jet fighter that can match or exceed these specifications within 48 hours. As the meeting disbanded, Eccles held back Colonel Ho. "Cass, how bad is this? Give me your honest assessment." Hof, a test pilot before becoming an intelligence officer, chose his words carefully. "Sir, if the Germans deploy these in numbers while we have no counter, it could change everything. The bombing campaign, air superiority over the invasion beaches, everything." Eccles nodded grimly. "Then we've got to solve this. Fast." The intelligence photographs that so disturbed General Eccles traveled quickly through classified channels. By the following morning, they reached the desk of Clarence Kelly Johnson, chief engineer at Lockheed's Burbank, California facility. Johnson, a Finnish-American aeronautical genius, known for his brilliant designs and equally fiery temperament, studied them with growing excitement rather than alarm. "John," he called to his assistant, John Wassell, "come look at this. The Germans have done it. Operational jet fighters." Wassell leaned over Johnson's shoulder, squinting at the photographs. "Damn, they've beaten us to it." "For now," Johnson replied, already pulling a drawer open. From it, he extracted a file marked L-140, dust gathering along its edges. "Remember this?" Wassell's eyebrows rose. The The design the Army rejected last year? Said it was too radical? Johnson nodded, spreading the preliminary drawings across his desk. Too unconventional, too experimental, too risky. That's what they told us. A thin smile crossed his face. Bet they're rethinking that position now. The L-140 design was Johnson's concept for a jet fighter that broke with conventional wisdom. While most early jet designs simply adapted existing airframes to jet propulsion, Johnson had proposed a clean-sheet approach. A streamlined fuselage with air intakes embedded in the sides, a cockpit positioned far forward for visibility, and wings optimized for high-speed flight. The Army Air Forces had deemed it too experimental when conventional piston engine fighters were doing the job adequately. That afternoon, the call Johnson had anticipated came through. Robert Gross, Lockheed's president, summoned him to his office where he found Gross speaking with a clearly agitated General Eccles via telephone. Johnson waited silently until Gross hung up. "Kelly," Gross said, "the Army is in panic mode over German jet fighters. They need a response, and they need it yesterday." Johnson placed his L-140 file on Gross's desk. "I might have something." By sunset, Lockheed had formally responded to the Army's emergency request with a bold proposition. They would deliver America's first operational jet fighter within 180 days. The proposal was based on Johnson's L-140 design, updated with the latest intelligence on German jet technology. When General Eccles saw the projected performance specifications, 550 miles per hour top speed, service ceiling 40,000 feet, range 500 miles, he immediately granted preliminary approval for prototype development. There was just one problem, as Johnson explained to his hand-picked engineering team late that evening. The Army wants this fighter without disrupting existing production. He told the 23 engineers and designers assembled in Lockheed's main conference room. That means no factory space, limited materials allocation, and minimal workforce diversion. The men exchanged skeptical glances. Lockheed's main production lines were running 24 hours a day, building P-38 Lightnings for the war effort. There simply wasn't capacity to add a revolutionary new aircraft to the schedule. "So, where exactly are we supposed to build this miracle fighter?" asked one engineer. Johnson's answer was characteristic of his unconventional thinking. "We're not going to use the factory. We're going to build it next to the factory." The next morning, Johnson led Robert Gross and a small group of executives to an empty plot beside the Burbank facility. "This is where we'll build America's first jet fighter," he announced. Gross looked skeptical. "There's nothing here, Kelly." "Exactly. No bureaucracy, no distractions, no existing procedures to slow us down." Johnson's eyes gleamed with the intensity that had earned him both admirers and detractors throughout his career. "Give me a secure facility here, 23 engineers of my choosing, and complete autonomy, and I'll deliver your jet fighter in 143 days. Gross stared at him. "You just cut 37 days off the proposal you sent to the Army yesterday." Johnson nodded. "Because now I know exactly how we're going to do it." Within 48 hours, construction crews had erected a temporary structure on the site Johnson had selected, not the proper building he had envisioned, but a large circus tent borrowed from the Ringling Brothers Circus, which happened to be on winter hiatus in nearby San Bernardino. The tent, quickly surrounded by security fencing and armed guards, would serve as the birthplace of America's first jet fighter and the legendary Skunk Works development approach that would transform aviation for decades to come. On September 23, 1943, Kelly Johnson gathered his hand-picked team of 23 engineers, designers, and mechanics inside the tent. The temperature already approached 90 degrees in the unventilated space, and the men shifted uncomfortably on folding chairs as Johnson outlined what many considered an impossible task. We have 143 days to design, build, and fly America's first jet fighter. He began without preamble. The Germans are already flying theirs. Every day, we fall behind puts more American lives at risk. He pinned concept drawings to a hastily assembled corkboard. This is the XP-80 shooting star, as I envision it. Unlike the Bell XP-59, which adapted a conventional airframe for jet propulsion, we're designing this aircraft around the engine from the start. Johnson pointed to the sleek, aerodynamic shape with its distinctive nose intake. The Army thinks this can't be done, not in our time frame. The conventional development process would take years. We're going to do it in months by throwing out the rule book. He outlined his radical approach, simultaneous rather than sequential development, with airframe construction beginning before the design was fully complete. Engineers working directly alongside mechanics to solve problems in real time, minimal documentation, and maximum autonomy, and perhaps most revolutionary, a flat organizational structure where the best idea won, regardless of who proposed it. There will be no committees, no reports, and no bureaucracy, Johnson concluded. Just engineering excellence and hard work. Any questions? There was only one from a young engineer named Richard Heppe. What about the engine? We don't have an American jet engine ready for this application. Johnson nodded grimly. That's our biggest challenge. We're going to use a British design, the Halford H-1, built by de Havilland. We've been promised the first engines in less than 60 days. What Johnson didn't mention was that the British engines were themselves an adaptation of German designs captured early in the war. The circular flow of technology, from German innovation to British adaptation to American implementation, represented the strange interconnections of wartime technological development. As the meeting concluded, Johnson established the relentless pace that would define the project. We work 7 days a week from now on, he announced. I'll be here every day, and I expect the same from all of you. If anyone isn't prepared for that commitment, speak now. No one spoke. The XP-80 project had begun. October 3, 1943. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. General Eccles studied the preliminary design package from Lockheed with equal parts hope and skepticism. The concept was sound, revolutionary even, but the timeline seemed impossible. He turned to his chief of fighter development. 143 days from concept to flight test, he said. Have you ever seen anything like this attempted before? No, sir, replied General Carroll. Conventional development takes years. Johnson is proposing to compress the entire process into less than 5 months. I'm not sure it can be done. Eccles nodded slowly. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree with you, but these aren't normal circumstances. He tapped the intelligence photographs of the Me-262 that remained on his desk. The Germans have changed the game. If we don't respond quickly, the air war could slip away from us. After a moment's consideration, Eccles signed the authorization for the XP-80 project, allocating emergency priority for materials and the British Halford engines. As his aide took the paperwork, Eccles added a handwritten note. Proceed with all possible speed. The outcome of the air war may depend on this aircraft. Back in Burbank, Johnson's team was already working at a pace that defied conventional aircraft development. Traditional aircraft design proceeded in careful, sequential steps. Conceptual design, preliminary design, detailed design, prototype construction, ground testing, and finally, flight testing. Johnson collapsed this process, with all phases happening nearly simultaneously. Engineers would design a component in the morning, Draft workers would create blueprints by afternoon, and fabricators would begin building it the next day, often before the adjacent components were fully designed. This approach required exceptional coordination and problem-solving skills, as inevitable conflicts and mismatches had to be resolved on the fly. The tent facility quickly took on the atmosphere of a pressure cooker. Temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees during the day, with the canvas walls providing minimal insulation against the California sun. Desks were arranged in tight clusters, allowing engineers to communicate directly rather than through formal channels. Johnson stationed his own desk in the center of the facility, making himself available for immediate decisions while maintaining constant oversight. "I want to see problems before they become problems," he told his team. "Bring me your challenges immediately. No waiting, no wondering." His leadership style was both inspirational and intimidating. Johnson worked longer hours than anyone, often sleeping on a cot in a corner of the tent for a few hours before returning to his drafting table. He rejected any excuse for delays, challenging his team to find creative solutions rather than accepting limitations. When materials allocation issues threatened to delay construction of the tail section, Johnson personally called the head of the War Production Board, invoking the project's emergency priority. When conventional machining techniques proved too slow for producing complex wing components, he brought in experts from Lockheed's tool and die department to develop new fabrication methods. By mid-October, less than 4 weeks into the project, the basic structure of the XP-80 was taking shape. The sleek fuselage, with its distinctive nose intake and streamlined cockpit, emerged from drafting tables to the factory floor with unprecedented speed. Engineers and mechanics worked side by side, resolving integration issues in real time rather than through the traditional change order process. This approach wasn't without challenges. The lack of finalized designs meant that some components had to be rebuilt multiple times as adjacent systems evolved. The absence of formal documentation created occasional confusion that required Johnson's direct intervention to resolve. And the pressure to meet seemingly impossible deadlines created enormous stress. "There were days when I wasn't sure we could do it," recalled Dick Heppe years later. The conventional wisdom said this kind of development timeline was impossible. But Kelly had a way of making the impossible seem not just possible, but inevitable. The project's greatest uncertainty remained the engine. The British Halford H-1 was itself still experimental, and the first examples weren't scheduled to arrive until early November. This meant the XP-80 airframe was being built around detailed specifications for an engine that no one on the team had physically seen or tested. It was like building a car around an engine that existed only on paper, explained Ben Rich, one of Johnson's key engineers. "We had the dimensions, the mounting points, the weight, the thrust figures, but until we actually had the engine in hand, we couldn't be certain everything would integrate properly." This concern proved prescient when the first Halford engine arrived on November 6th. While the physical dimensions matched the specifications exactly, several critical interface points, fuel connections, control linkages, and electrical systems required immediate redesign. Johnson's simultaneous development approach proved its value, as these changes were implemented within days rather than the months that would have been required under traditional development processes. As November progressed, the XP-80 took recognizable form. The distinctive shape, with its sleek nose intake, bubble canopy, and straight wings, represented a radical departure from the propeller-driven fighters dominating the skies over Europe. This was no adaptation of existing designs, but a purpose-built jet fighter, America's first. The pace continued to accelerate as Johnson drove his team toward the target first flight date of January 8, 1944, exactly 143 days from project initiation. Working through Thanksgiving with only a brief pause for turkey sandwiches delivered by Lockheed's commissary, the team completed primary structural assembly by early December. December 12th brought a major milestone: engine installation. The British Halford H-1, with its centrifugal compressor and annular combustion chamber, represented technology entirely new to American aircraft manufacturing. Special handling equipment had to be developed to mount the engine, and custom testing apparatus created to verify its operation before flight. As Christmas approached, Johnson reluctantly granted his exhausted team a single day off, December 25th, before the final push to first flight. Many used the rare break to reconnect with families they had barely seen for months. Johnson himself spent the day reviewing test data and finalizing the flight test plan with Lockheed's chief test pilot, Milo Burcham. Burcham, a legendary aviator who had performed aerobatics in the movies before the war, examined the nearly completed XP-80 with professional curiosity. "It's beautiful, Kelly," he told Johnson, "but it's like nothing I've ever flown before." Johnson nodded. "No one in America has flown anything like it. You'll be writing the book on jet aircraft handling." "Any advice?" Burcham asked with a slight smile. "Don't crash my airplane," Johnson replied, only half joking. "We don't have time to build another one." The final weeks of December and early January saw the completion of systems installation, ground testing, and the 1,000 details that separated an assemblage of parts from an operational aircraft. Hydraulic systems were pressurized and tested for leaks. Electrical systems were verified through exhaustive checks. The engine underwent careful run-up procedures, its unfamiliar whine replacing the familiar roar of piston engines that usually filled the Lockheed facility. On January 7, 1944, 142 days into the 143-day schedule, Johnson gathered his team around the completed aircraft, now designated the XP-80. "Tomorrow, she flies," he told them, fatigue evident in his voice, but pride shining through. "Whatever happens, what you've accomplished here is unprecedented in aviation history. 143 days from blank paper to operational jet fighter." As the team dispersed for a few hours of rest before the momentous first flight, Johnson remained behind, walking slowly around the aircraft. His hand traced the smooth metal skin, the elegant lines, the revolutionary jet intake. In less than 5 months, his team had brought America from years behind in jet fighter technology to the cusp of parity with the most advanced German designs. The implications extended far beyond a single aircraft. Johnson had proven that, with the right team, the right approach, and the freedom to innovate without bureaucratic interference, American engineering could achieve what many considered impossible. The XP-80 represented not just a new fighter, but a new paradigm in aircraft development, one that would influence aviation for decades to come. The dawn of January 8, 1944, broke clear and cold over Muroc Dry Lake, in California's Mojave Desert. The massive expanse of hardened clay, later to become Edwards Air Force Base, had been selected for the XP-80's first flight, due to its isolation and the vast open spaces that would give a test pilot room to recover from any unexpected handling characteristics. By 6 a.m., the aircraft had been transported from Burbank and prepared for its historic flight. The sleek fighter, nicknamed Lulu Bell by the ground crew, gleamed in the early morning sunlight, its polished aluminum skin unmarked by camouflage paint that would come later. A small crowd had gathered: Johnson and his core team, military observers, and Lockheed executives who had supported the unorthodox development program against considerable skepticism. Milo Burcham, wearing a standard flight suit rather than the pressurized garments later required for high-altitude jet flight, performed his pre-flight checks with methodical precision. The aircraft's systems were entirely new to American aviation. The unfamiliar jet engine start sequence, the different throttle response characteristics, the unique fuel system designed for kerosene rather than aviation gasoline. "How do you feel?" Johnson asked quietly, as Bertram prepared to climb into the cockpit. The test pilot grinned. "Like the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. Nobody in this country knows exactly what this thing will do." Johnson nodded, his face tense despite his efforts to appear confident. "Take it easy up there. Gentle maneuvers, no heroics. Just prove she flies." At precisely 7:33 a.m., the Halford engine spooled to life, its high-pitched whine so different from the thunderous roar of piston engines that several observers instinctively glanced around for the source of the unfamiliar sound. White exhaust condensation trailed from the jet pipe as Bertram ran through final checks. At 7:47 a.m., Lulu Bell began rolling forward, accelerating smoothly across the dry lake bed. The aircraft lifted off after a remarkably short ground roll, climbing steeply into the clear desert sky. America had entered the jet age in just 143 days, from Kelly Johnson's first sketch to Milo Bertram's historic takeoff. The first flight lasted just 11 minutes. Bertram kept the maneuvers gentle as instructed, testing basic handling characteristics and system functionality before bringing the aircraft back for a smooth landing on the dry lake surface. As he taxied back to the makeshift flight line, the small audience burst into cheers and applause. Johnson reached the aircraft first, as Bertram shut down the engine and opened the canopy. "Well?" he demanded, unable to contain his anxiety any longer. Bertram's face broke into a wide grin. "She's a beauty, Kelly. Handles like a dream. Accelerates like nothing I've ever flown. America just caught up with the Germans in a single leap." The test pilot's assessment was validated over the next 2 weeks, as flight testing continued at an accelerated pace. By late January, Bertram had taken the XP-80 to 20,000 feet and achieved a speed of 502 miles per hour, faster than any American fighter then in service and approaching the reported capabilities of the German Me-262. On January 26th, a delegation of senior military officials arrived at Muroc to witness a demonstration flight. Among them was General Oliver P. Echols, who had authorized the crash program just 4 months earlier with considerable reservations. As the XP-80 screamed overhead at nearly 500 miles per hour, Echols turned to Johnson. 143 days, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it possible." Johnson, never one for false modesty, replied simply, "Conventional development would have taken years. We didn't have years." The implications of what Johnson and his team had accomplished extended far beyond a single aircraft. They had demonstrated that with the right approach, small teams, minimal bureaucracy, simultaneous rather than sequential development, American industry could compress timelines previously thought impossible. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, immediately recognized the strategic significance of both the aircraft and the development process that created it. After reviewing the flight test data, Arnold ordered the XP-80 into immediate production as the P-80 Shooting Star, with the first operational aircraft to be delivered by the end of 1944. "The Germans have had years of lead time in jet development," Arnold told his staff. "Johnson just closed that gap in less than 5 months. Now we need to translate that achievement into operational aircraft as quickly as possible." The P-80 would ultimately not see combat in World War II. Despite the miraculous development timeline of the prototype, the complexities of setting up mass production meant that operational aircraft weren't ready for deployment until the European War had ended. The first production P-80As arrived in Europe in July 1945, too late to encounter the Me-262 in combat. Yet the strategic impact of Johnson's achievement cannot be measured solely by wartime deployment. The XP-80 program demonstrated America's ability to respond to technological surprises with unprecedented speed, sending a clear message to both enemies and allies about the nation's engineering and industrial capabilities. More significantly, the development approach pioneered by Johnson's team, soon to be formally established as Lockheed's Skunk Works, created a new paradigm for aircraft development that would repeatedly give America technological advantages in the decades that followed. February 15, 1944. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. General Arnold studied the comprehensive report on the XP-80 development with increasing interest. What had started as an emergency response to the German jet threat had evolved into something far more significant: a new methodology for developing advanced aircraft that compressed timelines previously thought immutable. "Tell me about Johnson's approach," Arnold asked Colonel Arthur Bissell, who had observed the project firsthand. "How did they accomplish in months what normally takes years?" Bissell consulted his notes. "Several key factors, sir. First, an extremely small team of elite engineers and mechanics, just 23 men total. Second, co-location of all personnel in a single facility, with minimal separation between design and production. Third, minimal documentation and bureaucracy. They focused on building the aircraft rather than writing reports about building the aircraft." Arnold nodded thoughtfully. "And the results speak for themselves. 500 miles per hour, 20,000-foot ceiling, all the performance metrics we hoped for." "Yes, sir. But perhaps, more importantly, they've established a template that could be applied to other critical development programs. Johnson is calling it the Skunk Works approach, after a moonshine operation in a popular comic strip." Arnold's interest was piqued. "You're suggesting we might use this approach for other high-priority projects?" "Exactly, sir. Conventional development has its place for standard aircraft, but for revolutionary designs where speed is critical." "This could be our secret weapon," Arnold finished. "Not just the technologies we develop, but how we develop them." Within weeks, Arnold had authorized the establishment of similar rapid development programs at other aircraft manufacturers, though none would achieve quite the same legendary status as Johnson's original Skunk Works. The approach would later produce such revolutionary aircraft as the U-2 spy plane and SR-71 Blackbird, maintaining American technological superiority throughout the Cold War. For the engineers and mechanics who had worked inside the circus tent in Burbank, the XP-80 program represented the pinnacle of their professional lives, a period when bureaucracy stepped aside and pure engineering creativity took center stage. "Those 143 days changed my entire understanding of what was possible," recalled Richard Heppe years later. "Before the XP-80, we accepted that aircraft development had to follow a certain timeline, with certain processes, certain approvals. Kelly showed us that with the right team and the right approach, we could compress years into months without sacrificing quality or safety." The human dynamics of the project proved as revolutionary as its technical achievements. Johnson's leadership style, demanding excellence but removing obstacles that prevented his team from delivering it, created an environment where engineers and mechanics felt personally invested in the outcome. It wasn't about working for Lockheed or even for the war effort, though those mattered, explained Ben Rich, who would later succeed Johnson as head of the Skunk Works. It was about proving that 23 guys in a tent could build a jet fighter faster than the entire German aircraft industry. It was about showing what American engineering could really do when freed from bureaucratic constraints. This spirit of engineering entrepreneurship combining technical excellence with organizational innovation, represented America's true advantage in the technological competition that characterized both World War II and the Cold War that followed. While totalitarian regimes could force development through central planning and coercion, they couldn't match the creative problem-solving unleashed when talented engineers were given autonomy within a framework of clear objectives. March 10, 1944. Rechlin Test Facility, Germany. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, Inspector General of the Luftwaffe's fighter force, received the intelligence report with growing concern. Photographs and technical specifications of the American XP-80, obtained through espionage networks, confirmed his worst fears. The Americans had developed a jet fighter comparable to the Me-262 in just a fraction of the time Germany had required. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his technical staff. "We've been developing jet fighters since 1938. The Americans started after we did, and yet they've nearly caught up." The answer, though not fully understood by German intelligence at the time, lay in the fundamental difference between the development approaches. Germany's jet program, while technically brilliant, had been hindered by bureaucratic infighting, resource constraints, and Hitler's frequent interference. The Me-262 had taken nearly 5 years from concept to operational deployment. Johnson's team, working with clear objectives and minimal interference, had compressed a similar development cycle to less than 5 months for the prototype. Though full operational deployment would take longer, the gap had closed dramatically in a time frame the Germans hadn't thought possible. This revelation shook the confidence of the German High Command, who had counted on maintaining technological superiority to offset the Allies' growing numerical advantage. If the Americans could respond this quickly to German innovations, no technological advantage would remain secure for long. The XP-80's development timeline revealed something more fundamental than a single aircraft program. It demonstrated America's ability to mobilize its engineering talent and industrial capacity with unprecedented speed and flexibility, a capability against which Germany had no effective counter. As spring turned to summer in 1944, the P-80 program transitioned from prototype development to production planning. The original Halford engines, supplied in limited numbers by Britain, would be replaced by General Electric J-33 engines, an American-produced version of the same basic design. Production facilities were established, pilots began training programs, and the Army Air Forces prepared for the deployment of jet fighters in combat. Though the P-80 would not see action in World War II, it would go on to play a crucial role in the Korean War, where it achieved the first jet-to-jet aerial victory in history when Lieutenant Russell Brown shot down a North Korean MiG-15 on November 8, 1950. By that time, more than 1,700 P-80 shooting stars had been built, all descendants of the aircraft that had gone from concept to flight in just 143 days. The true legacy of the XP-80 program, however, wasn't the aircraft itself, but the development approach it pioneered. The Skunk Works methodology, small expert teams, minimal bureaucracy, co-located design and production, became the template for America's most critical aircraft programs during the Cold War and beyond. When the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949, creating an urgent need for reconnaissance aircraft that could penetrate Soviet airspace undetected, it was Johnson's Skunk Works that delivered the U-2 spy plane in just 8 months. When the shooting down of Francis Gary Powers' U-2 in 1960 created the need for an aircraft that could fly higher and faster than any surface-to-air missile, the Skunk Works produced the Mach 3-capable SR-71 in record time. Each of these revolutionary aircraft traced its development lineage back to those 143 days in 1943 and 1944, when Kelly Johnson proved that with the right team and approach, the impossible could become routine. Johnson himself remained modest about his role in transforming aircraft development. "I didn't invent anything new," he often said in later years. "I just cleared away the obstacles that prevent engineers from doing their best work." This philosophy, that bureaucracy and excessive process are the enemies of innovation, became the cornerstone of the Skunk Works approach. Johnson codified it in his famous 14 Rules, which included such principles as the number of people having any connection with the project must be restricted in an almost vicious manner, and there must be a minimum number of reports required, but important work must be recorded thoroughly. These principles, revolutionary in 1944, have since been adopted by organizations ranging from NASA to Silicon Valley tech companies, all seeking to recapture the magic formula that allowed 23 men in a tent to build America's first jet fighter in just 143 days. The XP-80 story demonstrates that in technological competition, the decisive advantage often lies not in specific technologies, but in the systems that develop them. America's greatest strength in World War II wasn't any particular weapon, but its ability to innovate and produce at scales and speeds that adversaries couldn't match. In the decades following the war, the Soviet Union often matched or even exceeded America in basic research and theoretical science. What they couldn't match was the entrepreneurial engineering culture exemplified by Johnson's Skunk Works, the ability to translate promising concepts into operational systems with unprecedented speed and flexibility. This remains America's enduring advantage in technological competition. While authoritarian regimes can concentrate resources on high-priority projects, they struggle to replicate the creative problem-solving that emerges when talented engineers are given clear objectives, necessary resources, and the autonomy to find the best solution. The legacy of those 143 days extends beyond aircraft development to America's broader approach to technological challenges. When President Kennedy declared in 1961 that America would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, he was invoking the same spirit that had animated Johnson's team, the belief that with the right approach, seemingly impossible timelines could be met. Kelly Johnson remained active in aircraft development until his retirement in 1975, overseeing the creation of over 40 historic aircraft. He received virtually every honor in aerospace engineering, including 2 Collier Trophies and the National Medal of Science. Yet perhaps his greatest contribution wasn't any specific aircraft, but the development methodology that transformed how America approached its most critical technological challenges. The circus tent where the XP-80 was born is long gone, replaced by modern facilities bearing the now famous Skunk Works name. But the spirit of those 143 days, the belief that small teams of exceptional people, freed from bureaucratic constraints and focused on clear objectives, can achieve the seemingly impossible, continues to inspire engineers and innovators around the world. In an age of increasing bureaucracy and process-heavy development, the lesson of the XP-80 remains powerfully relevant. Sometimes, the most revolutionary aspect of a project isn't the technology it produces, but the way the technology is created. The 23 men who built America's first jet fighter in a circus tent didn't just change the course of aviation. They demonstrated an approach to innovation that remains America's secret weapon in technological competition. As Ben Rich, Johnson's successor as head of the Skunk Works, often said, "The Skunk Works has never been about specific aircraft. It's about proving that impossible timelines aren't really impossible. They just require a different approach." That different approach began in a circus tent in Burbank in 1943, when a brilliant engineer with an unconventional design and an impossibly tight deadline showed what American innovation could really accomplish. The rest, as they say,